Welcome to the Deep Dive. Ready to unpack some serious knowledge about teaching and learning.
We're going to figure out what makes it all tick.
Yeah, we've got some really interesting academic texts to explore. Get ready for a deep dive into how we learn best.
These sources are fantastic. They go way beyond the basics. We'll be uncovering the psychology behind learning, even how culture plays a role.
Yeah, no, just memorizing facts here. It's about really understanding how knowledge gets absorbed and skills are built. Something that really struck me was how learning is the star of the show in these texts.
Definitely.
Whether it's through structured training, traditional lessons, or just teaching.
Right. It doesn't matter the method. Learning is the key.
Yeah.
You know, the old view of teaching was all about shaping behavior or changing the way someone thinks. But now there's this newer idea that sees teaching more as guiding.
Oh, I see.
Helping learners find their own way to knowledge and skills.
So it's less about just giving information and more about supporting students as they explore and learn.
Exactly. Think of a teacher leading a really engaging discussion. They set the goals, make sure everyone participates, lay down the ground rules, and chime in with their own insights when it's needed. It's about making sure students are actively building their own understanding.
That's a really cool way to think about it. And speaking of understanding, the sources actually define learning as a change in behavior that lasts.
Right.
Because of, an experience.
Yes.
And they really highlight these 3 points.
Okay.
First, the behavior changes for real.
Yeah.
Second, the change sticks around.
It's not temporary.
And third, it's all because of something the person went through.
Exactly. And keep in mind, this change might not always be visible.
Oh, interesting.
It can be internal, like how someone processes info, tackles problems, even their attitude or interests.
So learning changes us in many ways. Some we can see, some we can't.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And now for the really cool stuff, different schools of thought about how learning happens.
Ooh, like what?
We've got the behaviorists, the cognitive folks, and the constructivists, each with their own perspective.
Okay, tell me more.
Remember Pavlov's dog?
Yeah, the one who learned to drool with the sound of a bell.
That's behaviorism in a nutshell. We learn by making connections.
The bell and the food, right?
Exactly. But those connections can change over time. Like, if you kept ringing the bell but stopped giving the dog food.
It would eventually stop expecting a treat.
Exactly. That connection fades away. We call that extinction.
Interesting. So what about the cognitive folks?
They're all about how our thinking evolves. Think about Piaget's stages of development.
From babies exploring the world through their senses to, teens thinking about abstract concepts.
Exactly. Our mental abilities grow and change over time.
That makes sense. And then we have the constructivists.
They see learning as a hands-on personal process. It's about building your own understanding.
Like creating your own mental model of the world.
Yes. You take new experiences and connect them to what you already know, constructing your own unique understanding.
That's a great analogy. So we've got these different ways of looking at how learning happens, but we all know there are things that can make it easier or harder, right?
Absolutely. Things inside of us and in the world around us.
The sources call them psychological factors and sociocultural factors.
Right.
So internally, we have things like intelligence, motivation, how we're feeling, how we see ourselves as learners, and even our preferred learning styles.
And intelligence isn't just one thing. It's multifaceted. There's linguistic intelligence, mathematical, musical, even interpersonal intelligence.
Like being great with people.
Exactly. And then there's Sternberg's idea that intelligence is about analytical, creative, and practical abilities.
So you could be great at solving problems and coming up with innovative solutions.
Precisely. And of course, we can't forget motivation. It's a huge factor in how much effort someone puts into learning.
The sources talk about intrinsic motivation. Like you just love learning for the sake of it.
Right, and extrinsic motivation, being driven by things like good grades.
They even mention a student named Mahesh who loved writing, but also wanted those good marks.
A great example of how both types of motivation can work together. And speaking of internal factors, emotions play a huge role too. Feeling good can boost learning. While stress and negativity can hinder it, it's all about those brain chemicals.
Like when you're super stressed and can't remember anything?
That's the stress hormone cortisol interfering with memory and focus. Creating a positive, relaxed environment is so important.
Definitely. And what about how we see ourselves as learners?
That's self-concept, and a big part of it is self-efficacy.
Believing you can succeed.
Exactly. If you think you can do well, you're more likely to put in the effort and achieve your goal. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
That's powerful. And then there are learning styles, which we all know can be so different.
Some people are visual learners, others auditory, and others kinesthetic. It's about finding what works best for you.
Makes sense. Now let's shift to the external factors, the sociocultural stuff.
This is all about how our families, communities, and even society can impact how we learn, starting with family.
The foundation.
Exactly. They pass on values, beliefs, and attitudes that shape how we see the world and approach learning.
Then, as we get older, our friends and community become more influential.
Think about peer pressure. It can motivate you to learn or, unfortunately, make you want to give up.
And what about the school environment itself?
That's crucial. A positive, supportive school where everyone feels safe and respected can foster a love of learning.
But a negative environment can have the opposite effect.
Exactly. A school should feel like a welcoming second home. It's all about creating a space where learning can thrive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that brings us to another important idea. Creating learning environments that actually make you want to learn.
We're not just talking about classrooms, though. We're also talking about community centers and even learning that happens just by living life.
It's not just about the location, but the whole experience.
You got it. You've got formal settings like schools, non-formal ones like community centers, and informal learning that happens within families or through hobbies.
Let's focus on classrooms for a bit.
Yeah.
What makes a great learning environment there?
Well, the physical space matters. Good lighting, comfy seating, and tools that help you stay organized.
But it's not just about how the classroom looks.
Right. The psychological environment is equally important.
The vibe of the classroom.
Exactly. The sources tell this story about a teacher, Mr. Day, who was struggling to get his history students engaged. It highlights how much a teacher's attitude, passion, and connection with students can impact the learning experience.
It's about making students feel comfortable enough to try, ask questions, and share their ideas, even if they're wrong.
Exactly.
So how do teachers create that kind of supportive classroom?
The sources suggest a few things: clear rules, opportunities for collaboration, positive feedback, and teachers who are genuinely excited about learning themselves.
Sounds like a recipe for a successful learning experience.
And then there's the question of how to structure those learning experiences. That's where teaching methods come in.
Okay.
We've got the traditional teacher-centered approach
The classic style.
and the more modern learner-centered approach. Each has its place. Teacher-centered is all about the teacher leading, delivering info, usually through lectures.
Right, like standing at the front, giving the lesson. I definitely see how that works.
Yeah.
Especially with larger classes or if there aren't a lot of resources. But learner-centered, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, learner-centered methods flip the script. It's all about putting the students in charge.
Oh, okay.
Making it about active learning, getting them involved, letting them build their own knowledge through exploration.
So it's less sit and listen and more like get involved.
Exactly. One great example is inquiry-based learning, all about asking questions, digging deeper, coming up with your own answers.
Like those plant experiments we talked about.
Right. Remember how the level of inquiry could change?
Yeah.
From just confirming, oh, plants grow towards the light, to designing a whole experiment.
Right. See what else affects plant growth.
And each level helps you build different skills. It's not just about getting the right answer.
It's about like becoming a better thinker overall.
Right. Exactly. And for younger kids, there's the playway method, using play, that natural instinct, to make learning fun and engaging.
So it's not just kids messing around. It's structured, right? Like learning through games.
Exactly. Think of games that teach colors or shapes, numbers, even reading. For little ones, learning through play is so effective.
Definitely. It keeps them interested. Now, cooperative learning, that sounds like something I would have loved in school.
It's all about teamwork, students working together towards a shared goal,
Nice.
which helps them learn communication, problem solving, even just getting along.
And wasn't the jigsaw method a good example of that?
Yes. Each student becomes an expert on a part of the topic. Then they teach it to their group.
Oh, cool.
Like a puzzle, everyone's piece is essential.
I love that. Everyone feels like they're contributing and their knowledge is valued.
Exactly. Now on to project-based learning. This is where things get really interesting.
This is where students get a bigger challenge, right? Like a real-world problem to tackle.
You got it. It could be building something, creating art, or finding a solution to a tricky problem. Even learning a brand new skill. The best part. These projects can be tailored to each student's interests.
So it's not just learning from a textbook. It's applying that knowledge.
Exactly. Making it real, meaningful.
I like that a lot. Okay, so We've covered a bunch of different ways to teach and learn, but how do we even know if it's working? That's where assessment comes in, right?
Absolutely. Assessment is about more than just grades. It's about figuring out what students have actually learned and how they've grown.
So it's not just one big test at the end.
Right. The sources talk about continuous and comprehensive evaluation, CCE for short. It's about making assessment an ongoing process.
Like checking in with students along the way.
Exactly. Seeing how they're doing, what they might be struggling with. And it's not just about testing their knowledge.
Just more well-rounded.
Right. Looking at the whole picture, their skills, attitudes, effort, everything.
That makes a lot of sense.
CCE uses a bunch of different tools to get that complete picture.
Okay.
From traditional tests to projects, observations, even keeping a portfolio of their work. And of course, we can't forget about technology and how it's transforming the way we teach and learn.
Oh, yeah. Technology is changing everything. We've come a long way from chalkboards.
Right. Now we have computers, the internet, all sorts of multimedia tools that can really bring learning to life.
Like having endless information at our fingertips. There are simulations, virtual reality, educational videos, and games. The possibilities are huge.
And don't forget e-learning. Taking classes online has exploded in popularity because it offers so much flexibility.
Yeah, learn at your own pace, on your own schedule, from anywhere. It's a game changer for people who need that flexibility.
Now, one last thing I wanted to touch on. Multi-grade teaching and teaching in diverse contexts. This is a reality for many teachers, especially in schools with limited resources.
So you might have students of all different ages and learning levels in the same classroom. That sounds really challenging.
It definitely takes a special kind of teacher to make it work. You need to be flexible, creative, and organized.
For sure.
The sources outline some strategies that can help. Direct teaching is still important, but you have to tailor it to each grade level.
Oh, right.
They also talk about using student helpers, having older students tutor younger ones, giving students opportunities for independent learning.
So it's about being resourceful and adaptable.
Exactly. And of course, teaching in diverse contexts often means working with students with disabilities. This requires even more flexibility and understanding from teachers.
You need to be able to adjust your teaching, accommodate different needs, and make sure every student feels supported.
It's incredible how much we've covered. We've looked at the psychology of learning, explored different teaching methods, talked about the impact of technology, and even touched on diverse learning environments.
We've taken a whirlwind tour of everything that goes into teaching and learning.
And the sources really drive home the point that there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Every student is different.
It's about understanding individual needs and helping students take charge of their own education, finding what works best for each student, and making those learning experiences engaging and meaningful.
So they want to keep coming back for more.
Exactly. Now, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about something that can really bring learning to life. Teaching learning materials.
Oh, you mean all those cool tools and resources that help make abstract ideas more concrete? Like show and tell for learning. I'm ready. I feel like we're about to open a treasure chest of learning goodies.
Yeah.
The sources talk about how these teaching learning materials, or TLMs, can stimulate all our senses. Hearing, seeing, even touching.
Making learning a multi-sensory experience. We've all had those aha moments, right? When a tricky idea suddenly clicks because we saw a diagram or, actually did an experiment.
It's like that saying, tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I learn. TLMs are all about that involve me part.
Exactly. They turn passive listening into active exploration. So, what kind of treasures can we find in this TLM chest?
I'm ready to dive in. What's first?
Well, let's start with the ones that engage our ears. The human voice, that's been a cornerstone of teaching forever.
Storytelling, too.
Absolutely. And then there are audio recordings, music, podcasts, audiobooks. They can really transport us.
And who could forget radio broadcasts? I remember listening to educational programs on the radio as a kid.
Right. It's been a powerful tool for spreading knowledge for generations. Now, let's move on to visual TLMs. This is where things get even more interesting. We've got the classic chalkboard or whiteboard.
The blank canvas for so many lessons.
And then you have charts, maps, graphs, diagrams, all great for making information easier to understand. They help us see patterns and connections that we might miss otherwise.
I'm a visual learner, so I always appreciated when teachers use those. What about posters? Those can be really eye-catching.
Posters are fantastic for grabbing attention and conveying important messages.
Yeah.
Then you have models, three-dimensional representations of, objects or systems, things we can actually touch and manipulate.
Like a model of the solar system.
Yeah.
Or the human heart.
Exactly. They really help you visualize and understand how things work. And of course, we can't forget the overhead projector, the OHP.
Ah, yes. The OHP, a classic.
Might seem a bit old school now, but it's been a staple in classrooms for so long. Lets teachers project images or, even handwritten notes for the whole class to see.
Sometimes the best teaching tools are the simplest, though, right? Like using real objects.
Absolutely. Bringing the real world into the classroom can be super effective. Think about bringing in rocks and minerals for a geology lesson or plants and insects for biology.
It makes learning so much more real and engaging. And speaking of engaging, we can't forget about technology and all the digital TLMs available now.
It's like a whole new world of learning has opened up. Interactive simulations, virtual reality experiences, educational videos, even online games that make learning fun.
It's incredible how technology is changing the game for both teachers and learners. Students can even create their own multimedia projects using technology.
But here's the thing. The sources emphasize that TLMs don't have to be expensive or fancy. You can create amazing learning tools using everyday materials and a little creativity.
I love that. It's like a DIY approach to education.
Exactly. They give the example of creating a neighborhood map with a big sheet of paper and having students add their own drawings and info about their community.
Making learning hands-on and relevant, that's great. But even with all these amazing TLMs, it's important to keep them organized, right?
Definitely. The sources talk about labeling materials clearly, creating inventories, storing them in a way that makes them easy to find and use. It's about having a system that supports both teaching and learning.
Okay, so we've got our treasure chest of awesome TLMs, and we have a system for keeping everything organized. Now what?
Now we talk about the heart of teaching, planning those learning experiences that bring all these elements together.
Planning is the secret sauce.
The sources highlight the importance of planning. They argue that well-planned lessons can make a huge difference, reduce teacher stress, minimize disruptions, and help create a better learning environment.
It makes sense. When teachers are prepared and have a clear plan, it brings structure and purpose.
Exactly. And they talk about different levels of planning, starting big and then zooming in on the details. You have the annual plan, the unit plan, and the lesson plan, each with its own focus.
So the annual plan is like the roadmap for the entire school year. Right.
You got it. It should lay out the curriculum goals, the textbooks and resources, the yearly calendar, and how student learning will be assessed, setting the stage for the year ahead.
And then we get to the unit plan.
The unit plan is where you dive deep into a specific topic.
Yeah.
It outlines the key concepts, the learning activities, the assessments, the materials, and the time frame.
The sources give that great example of a unit plan focusing on the environment.
Right. It lays out everything. Learning objectives, activities, assessment methods, even how to connect the unit to real-world issues. A comprehensive guide to keep everything on track and ensure a well-rounded learning experience.
I like that. So we've got the big picture, the unit plan. Now let's zoom in on the lesson plan, the details of what happens in a single class.
The nitty-gritty. The lesson plan should clearly state the learning objectives, the content, the methods and activities you'll be using, the materials needed, and how you'll be checking for understanding.
The sources really emphasize that. Having a clear and detailed lesson plan is essential.
Keeps things running smoothly, ensures everyone is on the same page. They even provide a step-by-step guide. How to grab students' attention, connect to prior knowledge, give explanations and examples, and check for understanding throughout.
It's like having a script for the learning experience. Now, what about that constructivist approach we talked about earlier? How does that influence lesson planning?
Great question. The sources talk about how constructivist teaching can really shape your lesson plans.
So it's about creating those opportunities for students to build their own knowledge, right?
Exactly. Constructivist lesson plans are all about engaging activities, hands-on experiences, opportunities for students to explore, experiment, collaborate.
So lots of open-ended questions, giving them problems to solve, encouraging them to think critically and creatively, even letting them learn from their mistakes.
Exactly. And assessment in a constructivist classroom goes beyond traditional tests. It's about observation, student reflections, peer feedback, even evaluating the learning process itself, valuing the journey as much as the destination.
And the teacher's role changes too, right?
Definitely. From sage on the stage to more of a guide or facilitator, supporting students, offering guidance, creating that safe space for them to take risks and explore their own ideas.
So it's a more student-centered approach.
Hmm.
We've talked a lot about planning curriculum activities, but what about those co-curricular activities, the things that happen outside of class time?
Those are crucial too. Co-curricular activities give students the chance to develop social skills, explore their interests, discover hidden talents. Things you can't always get from a textbook. It's like the icing on the cake of a well-rounded education.
But it sounds like they shouldn't just be random, unplanned events.
Exactly. The sources stress that these activities need planning and organization, just like any other part of the curriculum. Clear objectives, structured activities, effective leadership, and even ways to evaluate their impact.
So these activities should be both fun and beneficial for students' development.
Right.
Wow, we've really covered a lot today. It's amazing how much goes into creating a truly effective learning environment.
It's a complex system with so many moving parts, and it's constantly evolving as we learn more about how students learn and as new technologies come into play. But no matter what changes, one thing stays the same: the passion and dedication of teachers.
It's those inspiring teachers who really spark that love of learning in their students. Help them become lifelong learners. That's what it's all about.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want you to think about your own learning journey. Whether you're an educator, a parent, or just someone who enjoys learning, how can you create environments that nurture that process? How can we all help each other keep learning and growing? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Absolutely. And remember, the journey of learning never really ends. There's always something new to discover.